Okay, continuing now. One thing I wanted to ask you about, and this is something that spurs from a conversation I had with a brother yesterday. I went to the Freemasonry development course, you know, that day-long thing where they give you advice on various matters. And this guy was from Brazil, and he's more of an international Freemasonry type guy. And we got an interesting conversation about Albert Pike and the influence that Pike had on American Masonry. Now, first of all, what is your opinion of Albert Pike? If it's negative, don't hold anything back. What do you think of him, per se, as a figure and his influence on the craft?
Well, his influence on the craft is minimal, if by the craft you mean the basic 3 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
His influence on the other degrees beyond the craft, particularly in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, was enormous. It depends on who you talk to, whether Pike was an influence for good or not.
Mm-hmm. See, the Brazilian guy, his argument was for not.
Right.
Because he argued, and now this goes to another one of my pet issues that a lot of Masons never think about, which is the calendar of light and the whole 6,000-year timetable that the craft is supposedly based on, mythologically. He was saying that Pike brought in a bunch of Greco-Roman Hellenic mystery ideas, which in this guy's opinion have nothing at all to do with the craft. See, this guy I was talking to, he's more of a 1717 forward is the only thing legitimate to think about. That's his view.
Yeah.
He's obviously defending the English side, which is fine. I didn't try to argue with him on that point. But his main criticism of Pike was that there's no validity to a lot of his associations back to the ancient past, and therefore it muddies the waters and lends a kind of sinister air for anti-Masonic critics who want to say, oh, it's paganism in a new form. What's your comment to that?
The comment on that is, as I said before, it's like beauty, it's in the eye of the beholder.
Mm-hmm.
There is no doubt that Pike was an intelligent man. He was a deep thinker. He had his views on what sort of allegorical material would fit into Freemasonry.
Mm-hmm.
And he certainly set out in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite to turn it into a Masonic body that was devoid of all religious bigotry,
Mm-hmm.
which could not be said about the forerunners of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite.
Were they more pro-Christian and everyone else is...
They were more pro-Protestant than anything else.
Ah, I see.
They were virulently anti-Catholic.
So they're influenced by the endless battles of the early 16, 17, 1800s between Protestantism and the church, per se.
Yep. And see, a lot of this stuff, the pre-runners of the Scottish Rite, grew up in Europe, and all sorts of little places had their own versions of all these degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly in places like Germany, Austria, etc. and so forth, where the feud between the Protestants and the Catholics was pretty strong, and people were getting killed because of it.
Right. Like the 30 Years' War, etc.
Yeah.
Right.
These virulent anti-Catholic degrees started to appear.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of Pike's abilities was that, I'm not saying he started the removal of the anti-Catholic stuff, but he was able to coalesce it. Mm-hmm. And he came up with a version of the degrees that he was happy with. The fact that he went back to the Greco-Romans, etc., is, to me, irrelevant, because we are told in Freemasonry that it's always had an affinity with the ancient mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
And anything in Freemasonry can be found way back in all these things, because if it was Freemasonry teaches or lectures on or allegorises on those truths that have been part of any civilised organisation.
So what do you say then to those kind of, I guess you'd call them Anglo-purists who want to claim that nothing before 1717 should even be considered?
there are some people in this world that don't know that they don't know. That's fine.
Uh-huh.
They'll wake up eventually.
Right.
There are some people in this world that don't know, but they know they don't know. And they'll listen, they can teach you. But there are other people in this world that don't know, but they know they know. They're the English.
Uh-huh. They don't know that they know.
They know. As far as they're concerned, they know. Whatever anybody else says, they know.
Uh-huh. And so, I'll just close this door if you don't mind. So
just leave it too. Don't close it completely. I don't want to shut people out.
Okay. So the
look, the English are very strong on nothing happened before 1717. That nothing happened in Scotland.
Right.
That it was all done by the English. That's fine.
No Templar connections. No Rosicrucian connections. Right.
Yeah, that's the English approach. That it grew out of the various guilds in England. End of story.
Right. And so they have a particular problem with Pike, who wants to illuminate the connections to the ancient past in a more forceful way.
They have a problem with a lot of people. They have a problem with John Cooper up in Scotland.
Right.
You know, who will put forward the Scottish point of view from where Freemasonry started from.
Mm-hmm.
And they certainly have problems with Pike. But look, the main problem they've got, a lot of people have with Pike, is very minimal, and it all hinges on the use of the Lucifer.
Right. See, it's interesting. I'll give you just a little bit of my history on that. I've always tripped up on this propaganda point of Lucifer equals light equals the devil, therefore Freemasonry is Satanism, right? And I was reading John Robinson's book, Born in Blood.
Yes.
Which, ironically enough, turns out to have the most rational pro-Masonry interpretation of this point, where he says, look, the whole association of Lucifer being the name of Satan, the devil, actually emerges during the King James translation of the Bible. And what had happened is that the name that the King James translators in Latin took to mean Lucifer, translating it out of the Latin, actually is a name for a Babylonian king who's being referred to in the Old Testament. And his name is sufficiently similar to Lucifer that they made an association that actually has nothing to do with Lucifer, the devil, ever being the light bearer. And Lucifer, as in the light, supposedly is referring more to that Greco-Roman type of illumination coming from the all-seeing eye, the Egyptian influence, and that this whole propaganda campaign really hinges on a translation error. And that when Pike was referring to Lucifer, he's referring to it in the Greco-Roman sense, and not the falsely attributed devil of the Old Testament sense. And the thing is, most people will never do the research to figure out that that's the case. They're just looking for something controversial in Freemasonry, and let's say, oh, that Lucifer thing, oh, it must be the devil.
The argument that Robinson puts forward about that where the Lucifer does appear in the Old Testament, that it is an allegory against a vicious Babylonian king.
Right.
There's nothing new about that. That's been around for a long time, and it's probably true. I'm not questioning it.
Why have we never heard of it aside from that book? As far as I'm sure it's been around, but it's not talked about.
Well, point number one is very few people actually read the Bible.
Right.
Point number two, that if a minister is going to give his sermon on the Bible, he's going to pick something that is of interest and importance to him. So there's not too many texts that he's going to take out of the Bible anyway.
Right.
Thirdly, your average minister of religion, running a parish or whatever you want to call it, is not necessarily endowed with great wisdom. Biblical students at theological colleges have been aware of these things for many, many years. But they're not the sort of thing to take out into the...
Right, and they don't want to be seen as defending Freemasonry per se on an obscure point, as if they have a problem with the church, or it could create a whole bunch of political, let's say, fallout.
Well, it opens up something that we all get a little bit insular. To them, it's not important. This particular interpretation. Yes, we know that's in the Bible, but okay, that's just one of the many things that are in the Bible.
Right.
They're not necessarily attacking or defending Freemasonry or anything else. They just have no. There's no connection as far as they're concerned. Lucifer being the light bringer, yes, that's an interpretation that's been around for, and it's part of Pike's interpretation. But in Australia, up until not that many years ago, you could buy Lucifer matches. And the word Lucifer was chosen by the manufacturers not to mean Satan, but to mean light bringer. And we now get back to the fundamental problem that will always occur when someone wants to attack Freemasonry.
Which is?
You use this symbol and it means such and such. And we say, no, we use that symbol, but it means something else. No, you can't, it means such and such. And that's what's happened with Pike. They've latched on to a very small part of his writing. Look, even when in England in a dozen years ago now, I think it was the Anglican Church had their latest review of Freemasonry. When they brought down the final report, one of the clauses simply said, some of the correspondence mentioned Pike, etc. and so forth. Pike is discredited. The argument that they're putting forward is long been discredited. Stop quoting Pike at us.
Right.
You know, as a proving that we're such and such. Pike's real trouble is he is so terribly, turgidly verbose.
True. Morals and Dogma is not an easy read by any
nobody
means.
really reads it.
Right, exactly.
So my answer to Pike is, I think he was a very intelligent man in the context of when he was writing, both the getting rid of, cleaning up the degrees, and secondly, in an era when you didn't use 3 words if you could use 120.
Right.
I mean, anybody who's read Dickens,
Indeed.
Jane Eyre and all these great literature from England, which I'm not knocking anyway, but they're not, they use a lot of words where they could use a lot. And Pike is writing that way. He's using a lot of words because that was the way it was done.
Right.
If he was writing today, he would probably write it in the same form as Dan Brown did with the Da Vinci Code, which would be a lot of short paragraphs, mostly full of rubbish. But
with an exciting chase scene thrown in.
That's right. But in the context of and when people read him 120, 150 years later, and interpret or base their judgment on what is literature today, then they're being unfair to the man. They've got to base it on what was literature back 150 years ago.
Yeah, what you're highlighting there is a problem I have with a lot of anti-Masonry propagandists, and that is that they ignore the real context of whatever it is they're quoting, and then manufacture a false selective context predetermined to fit their conclusion.
That's right. And when you tell them that that's not right,
right,
they don't want to know.
Right. Then I'm just being a propagandist for Freemasonry, in their view.
Yes. Wait for the camera, Terry.
I see. So now, this is one thing that's very interesting here, and again, it goes to aspects of Freemasonry that show its multi-leveled and multi-purpose nature. As you and I had talked a year ago, obviously some people join the craft and they have no interest in the deep symbolism, nor do they need an interest. And it's a social thing. It can be a political connections or economic connections or just having a beer with the mates per se, and that's fine. But there's also the different strata, which is specifically concerned with the symbolic interpretations, and I'm obviously of this breed. And so for me now, looking at the past of the craft, and here's a question that a lot of people never consider, I think, about the calendar of light. Now we know that Freemasonry is dated using the calendar of light, which is down to 4000 BC, right? Now the quick out of the gate response on this is always, oh, it goes to Bishop Ussher and his calculation of the patriarchs, which gave us a date of creation for 4004 BC, which is again assuming a Christian bias to the craft, which I don't think was ever necessarily there, especially at the symbolic level, right?
Oh, I think the craft was originally very Christian.
Well, let's say the calendar of light, going back to the 4000 BC. What is their purpose, in your opinion, for creating the calendar to begin with? Then, the whole continuity of history for 6,000 years. What's their objective?
Whose objective?
Well, that's a good question. Who created the calendar? Who gave us the calendar? Who designed the fact that it would be 4000 BC?
Anybody who made a literal count. Anybody who took the Bible as literal and added up the ages of the patriarchs would come up with 4004.
Right.
And there were an enormous number of people, then as there is now, who take every word in the Bible as being literal.
But the thing is, the calendar of light does not go to 4004. It goes to the year 4000. And this is an interesting subtext.
In Freemasonry?
In Freemasonry.
Oh, they did that because it just rounded it off.
Maybe. But here's another thread, and this goes back to the Pike connection. Pike is drawing, and I believe it was Pike or one of his lieutenants in the symbolic revisioning of history. I can't quote the exact person right now, but the 4000 BC mark happens to coincide with another event, which was the explosion of a star in the sky called Vela 9 in the year 4000. And from the point of view of anyone living in the Egypt to Sumer equatorial region, for that year, 6 to 7 months, there was no darkness because this supernova was in the sky. And the Egyptian mystery cults...
Oh, cut the phone.
Okay.
Come in, John. Sorry.